is okay. Today, we're going to go back and finish, got my book here. We're going to go back and finish chapter 8, Violence and Religion. But let me make a few announcements. We started it last week, but we got a little behind, but that's okay. We'll pick up. Time is just moving on. We are coming to the end of our semester. I hope this has been a blessed class for you. Okay, so next week, today is the 23rd, right? So next week, date is the 30th. Yes, the 30th. That's my cousin's birthday. That's going to be our last meeting, is going to be the 30th. So let's get a couple of notes down, okay? Today we're going to kind of go backwards a little bit. Today we're going to go back and cover chapter 8, Violence and Religion. This week is week 8, okay? So we're supposed to be in chapter 9, social action or social activism, and your discussion for this week deals with Dr. King and Malcolm X and how they use social action, social activism coupled with religion. So that's going to be your forum for week 8. Remember, your forums are like your weekly quizzes. Let me just talk about week 9. So next week we're going to wrap up with social activism. Week 9 is chapter 14. We're going to talk about ritual studies real quick next week. When we talk about rituals, those are the things that people do in the religion. For example, like a baptism, a cleansing, even marriages are rituals, communions, or seders. Okay, so we'll talk about that next week. So we got a real packed week next week as we wrap it up. Now, let me get my calendar. Hold on one second. Got all my little folders here. It happens, I got to print stuff out, because if I don't print it out, I forget. Now, you also have your final paper, and I want to go over that real quick. I'm pulling out your syllabus. I'll try to print out everything. All right, and if you look on your calendar for your syllabus, we are going to wrap up next week, but you still have time to do your final paper. And so like technically, like our last day of class is like December the 1st. We don't meet on the 1st. And then that week after the 1st, like December 2nd through the 8th, you're going to be working on the final paper. The final paper, not sure if you can see my screen. Can you all see my screen that says final paper instructions? Sometime it doesn't change. Okay, thank you, Mr. James. All right, so let's talk about this quickly for my students who are here and are watching virtually. For your final paper, we're going to focus, you have 2 choices that will kind of come from these last 2 chapters, 2 choices of your topic. You can either choose the first choice. Students will either compare and contrast 2 different religions' practices. For example, you could talk about marriage is a practice, or giving to the poor. You could talk about some type of cleansing ritual that's done in 2 different religions. You can pick the different religions. It is up to you. You're going to tell me what is similar, and you're going to tell me what is different. All right. Or you don't like that one. I want you to research. Second choice is you can research social activism within one religion of your choice. What does social activism look like in Islam or Christianity or Judaism? How do they work within that religion? What do their scriptures or their sacred texts tell them in terms of working in the community, working to make things better? And you can give me examples of that as well. The paper should be at least 5 pages, so you're going to work on that from now until December the 8th. And you can include your introduction, your research, your thesis statement. Make sure that if you cite anything that is outside of you, you tell where you got it from. Okay. Make sure you look over your work for any spelling or grammar errors, because there'll be a deduction for that. Make sure you read over your work. Okay. All right. So once again, after next week's final session, you're going to be working from about December 2nd to December 8th on your final paper. And that will be either one of the two choices. Okay. Any questions before I change? Remember, if you have any questions also, those will be good for the virtual people watching. All right. Okay, thank you, everyone. Well, let's get down to it. We are going to go back to our lesson. I think I lost it. Let's go back to our lesson on Chapter 8, Violence and Religion. I'm coming back to you. Let me know when you can see it on the screen. All right. Let me know if you see Bruce Lincoln at the top. Okay, thank you. All right, everyone. I am in, if you have your books with you, I'm in Chapter 8. We're finishing up this issue of, is religion violent? Are the people in it violent? Is the religion violent? What's going on? Now, a couple of things I want you to see here. We're going to talk about 3 or 4 scholars today. Okay. So we have Lincoln, Bruce Lincoln, and one of the key things this particular scholar says is, if a religion, let's define a religion. And he said, if you have a religion, it should do 4 things. It should have a discourse. And a discourse is what the people believe, what they talk about, what they write down in their sacred text. Do they have a book? Okay. 2, it should have a set of practices. What are their rituals? What do they do? What are their actions? What do they believe? What are their moral behaviors? Do they get married to, many people, or do they believe that no, you just have to have one wife or husband? Okay, that's what we mean, moral behaviors. Community. They should have a community of people, a community of members, that everybody in this particular group shares the common identity as a Muslim, or common identity as a Jew, or as a Christian, or as a Buddhist. Okay, so they have common practices that they do, similar things that they may say. There are standards. There is a book that they all read. Okay. And then the last thing, number 4, there's an institutional structure. There's some type of hierarchy. There's some type of leadership. Maybe like in Catholicism, there's the Pope. Okay. Well, you have different denominations of Christianity, and they may be run different ways. Like there may be a bishop or something, but there's some type of leadership. They just don't run around and just, oh, well, today we're going to marry 10 people, and then next week we're going to marry one person. There's some type of structure. Okay, so let's just pause right here. Let's open our microphones. Last week we talked about Jim Jones and the following he had. Jim the whole Jim Jones thing doesn't really fall under a religion. Can somebody tell me why? Look at these 4 points, and what did the whole Jim Jones movement will say? What was it missing out of 1 through 4? Anything?
The text.
Bingo. It was missing a text.
I'm not sure I'm not sure if he supposedly used the Bible for let me see, discourse, what they talked about or believed in. I suppose that was Jim Jones, as practices and rituals more.
They did have a kind of 1 and a 2.
Yeah.
I do believe 3 was definitely missing.
Yeah, institution structure, this religion's, because the higher leadership was just Jim Jones and his folk.
There you go.
But
so number 4, there was no institutional real structure. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was a leadership of a man, of really a man.
Of just a man.
Just a man.
I don't know, but was it supposedly be a Christian basis? No. Did the Bible? I'm not sure. I don't know.
He may have taken scripture, but he did not use it for good. He twisted things, but it was not necessarily based on Christ. It did not speak of Christ. It did not speak of salvation. It did not speak of, God in that sense of an Old and New Testament. So it was very warped. There was not, I'm going to live my life for the creator God. It was, so that's where in number 4, they were missing the hierarchy and leadership because it just fell into one person. And too, that's a real good point about the Christian Bible text. Now, just think about this, gentlemen. If Jim Jones were to let them read the Bible, it probably would open their eyes or take them away from Jim Jones's movement. So I'm sure he didn't want them to read the truth. Okay. So I wanted you to see that as we are, let me scoot down, as we're looking at Dr. Lincoln's attempt to define, and these are not all of the things, right? But he said if we're going to define what a real religion is, it should have those 4 things. Okay, so let's keep going down. I want to talk about, when we talk about views of religion, this how sometimes we get, I don't want to say us, but the world, society can get violent. There are 2 views, 2 different views, maximalist and minimalist views. Let's look at those individually and then we'll discuss. The maximalist view of their religion says, they say this view, they say, okay, my religion is going to go into everything in my life, how I see politics, economics, food, my social life, family life, how you raise the children, all of that. For example, when we talk about the maximalists, they may make rules or make changes, for example, to like a school curriculum to reflect the religion. Or like the maximalists would, you saw this a lot also during, I guess you could say after integration, and when things started to change, parents would take their child out of the public school because some wanted it to reflect religion, because the public school wasn't going to reflect a particular religion. A maximalist person will perhaps change their dress based on their religion. For example, if anybody been to Amish, like an Amish country, this summer we were in Pennsylvania, and we took my mom to a play, and it was in the Amish country of Pennsylvania. And the women, we would see the women in their beautiful dresses, very, long, but they have to wear that dress. Or the men, we would see them basically in like a white button down shirt, black pants, and suspenders. That's basically what they're going to wear. That's like their dress because of their religion. Um, Lastly, the maximalist view. This where it can get a little dangerous here. They think of themselves as more faithful, and other people are like the heathens. They do that over there, and this other group is good, um, or faithful, or better. The minimalist view says that, okay, while my religious concerns are important, other people's religious concerns are important. Doesn't mean that they're going to adopt them, but they're not going to beat the person up because they serve a different religion. Minimalists will also advocate for some type of protection of their religion from other government interference from the outsiders. We saw that a lot. Y'all remember 2020, yeah, when the pandemic first hit and we weren't able to gather physically in churches. I think it was a certain number or something that could gather at first. And then, those regulations went down. But the minimalist view, you saw some churches fight back and say, hey, look, no, the government can't tell us how many people can come in our church. We're going to come in here and worship. So that's an example. Minimalist view will also see their religious activity and their influence, but they will have it remain in their private practice. So they're going to do what they want to do. They're going to practice their religion how they want to, but they're not necessarily going to, put it out there for everybody to display. Minimalists also say that they're not necessarily going to hurt or punish somebody else or another group of people because they don't share the same faith. Now, as we open this up for discussion, I want to go back to the maximalist group, and this is where we saw 9/11. We definitely saw the individuals that committed those heinous crimes and killings were in the maximalist category, where they saw their religious undertaking of doing these horrific crimes and killings as faithful. And they saw us, the American people, we've seen all this over and over again the past, 20 something years, of how some, not all, of those who followed that religion saw, the Americans as greedy, always concerned about money. That's the reason why they hit the towers, because that's a symbol of economics. Let's just pause right there. As we look at the minimalist and maximalist views, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will fall in either one category. There may be some of the things that you might, pull from either category, but you may not have all of them. Any comments on maximalist or minimalist views?
I suppose the maximalists sometimes will look like extremists, and I'm thinking about these so-called the evangelicals that we see today. but they're very short, seem to be very short-sighted on
Sure, sir.
which practices, if you would, that they horn in on as being as what we'll use to define your religion. I'm not sure now. Another thing I think about is some of the older, like the the Quakers, not the Quakers. Yeah, I guess the Quakers that may be, they are very extremist in their practice and on what they're doing. So I'm assuming it seems like Maximists are people who appear to be extreme in their practices.
They do seem to be extreme. I want to Quaker could also now you know Quakers helped us out quite a bit around slavery.
Sure did.
So Quaker could also go in the minimalist category too, because they advocated against the government as well, you know, with enslaved people. They did believe that, yes, their religious concerns were important, but also embrace the religion of enslaved Africans as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess I'm thinking
that's a good point.
The actually, it's not. I don't think what I was really thinking. I can't think of the people now. They're in Pennsylvania a lot, but they stay away from themselves.
The Amish.
Amish,
yes.
Thinking about. I'm sorry. That Amish is what I was really trying to think about.
Yes, so good example. So that's the one like in point 3 on the maximalist. So that's what I was saying. When we went there this summer, we saw the women were dressed a certain way, the men were dressed, the little girls were dressed a certain way. They're not gonna wear no jeans, right? They're not gonna drive a car. Well, you know what? I take that back. We did see some of them driving, but most of them, it was so awesome to see. They had horse and buggies.
Right.
Stay awesome.
away from, and I guess some of the what they call them, Orthodox Jews today.
Correct.
May be in
maybe a maximalist. Yeah. Maximalist. So as we observe, as we're working in this world, we're going to see people that may fall into both categories, may have some of either or we may see some of the view that are just straight maximalists, like, it's going to be this way. They're kind of rigid, as you said. But the key thing is that 4th point we see, unfortunately, that they kind of see themselves as we're better and the other people are devilish or heathen because they don't have the faith like us. And unfortunately, that's where you get violence sometimes, as we have seen in our lifetime, where they feel that they have to do something about it. Okay. All right. What counts as religion? Let's keep talking about religion. What counts as religion? So I'm on page 102 of your book. There are 2 types, or there are 2 forms of religion. So it can happen to you individually or to a group of people, that's interpersonal, or it can be structural violence. So let's talk about these. And then I got a question for you after we talk. I want to see if you have experienced or seen some of these. Interpersonal violence. And remember, we're talking about within a religious setting. May occur to a person or a group of people. It could be something deliberate. It could be a physically harming them, hurting them, Lord, killing them, maiming them, taking something off of their hair or something like that. It could be an emotional, a psychological harm. done to the person, shaming them. It could also be a physical hurt where, or physical loss, where there's some physical damage to the property, or saying, no, you can't come in here, or there's some denying access to the religious property. Structural violence is a little bit different. So it's not necessarily physical anymore, but I don't know, this might, but sometimes even if it's not physical, it still hurts, which could be oppression, something like a sexism, all the isms, right? Sexism, racism, heterosexism, uh, uh, we could just keep going down the list of isms, right? Um, let's pause here. Have you seen violence in the form of interpersonal or structural in a religion?
Are you talking about personal experience?
Personal or historical,
Oh,
either or.
well, obviously historical is the way, well, and even today we see religion being weaponized, particularly in racist type, in this country, in racist type situations, even from slavery through civil rights era.
Yes.
And even today, when you look at, in many cases, where religion maybe is used in order to try to maintain control.
That's
And
what it is.
used as a weapon.
Good.
So structurally, yeah, I mean, it's been probably forever, particularly as we've studied, we've
Yes.
seen it's, the thing I think about interpersonal is the stories or the cases you hear, for instance, about the Catholic priests that were abusing youngsters.
That's it. That's interpersonal violence, correct? Harming children, you know, sexually violating them. That's horrible. That's I don't want to say very good, but that is an example of interpersonal violence.
You know, something I just thought of. I don't know, you remember the case of several years ago here in the Atlanta area? I think the church was called Harvest, over in DeKalb County.
Okay.
Oh, what was that church called? Something Harvest, and the bishop eventually had to close because he was having inappropriate relationships with staff members. What was that church called? I think it was maybe International Harvest or something of that nature. It was in DeKalb County.
Okay.
Large, very large church.
Large church.
What happens when you get old?
That's all right. But it's so many of them. Sometimes they all run together, which is sad.
Yeah. I can't.
But that's an example of interpersonal violence. Yes, the leader being inappropriate with, whether it's women, men, children, whatever it is, that's definitely interpersonal violence. Yeah. Oh, another one I want to put on there, I guess this could be interpersonal as well, but it can also fall under structural violence, is when you think about the burning of crosses in southern towns, and especially at Black churches. And so it was one, a mechanism of control. It was racist to try to keep them in fear. And then two, it was interpersonal because you're physically damaging a property, damaging the church or maybe somebody's house or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So even when we talk about, I'm gonna keep going here, when we talk about sexism and racism, maybe denying a particular gender to do something, that would be structural violence as well. Just because you're a lady or just because you're a man can't do this, that, and the other. That's structural violence. Okay, we're almost there. I'm on page 103. We're talking about Charles Kimball. So here's another one of our scholars. We talked about Lincoln, right? Yeah, Bruce Lincoln. So Charles Kimball, he's a professor of comparative religion, and he came up with some interesting things. He says, is religion inherently violent? So he says, now remember, these are what the scholar believes, that you don't have to believe it. He says that religions partly lead to violence. Now he didn't, I want you to remember what he said when we come to, I believe it's Avalos is the next one. Kimball said religions partly lead to violence. So he didn't put it solely on them 100%. He said that people of a particular religion, they can believe their truth, right? Their particular truth in their religion, and don't accept the truth claims of other religions. He said that when this happens, sometimes people can become rigid. That's what we saw in 9/11. They believed their own truth and didn't accept the truth claims of all these other religions out here. They were extremely rigid, and you saw them act out. That whole 9/11 was an acting out of their religious belief. That's where, and we talked about Jim Jones last week, but that's where Kimball says you would get these holy wars that would happen either in history, if we've seen even in our lifetime, these holy wars would happen because one religious group was not trying to open their eyes. They weren't trying to open their ears to hear, or even just sometimes, just sometimes ignore, because you're not going to agree with everybody. They weren't even willing to ignore what another religion's truth was. And I think sometimes as we're studying this religion and religious studies course, right, and we're learning about different religions, we're learning what they do, and it may also be different from what we may practice in our personal religion, right? But it doesn't mean that we're going to go out and start practicing that tomorrow. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to ascribe any type of value to it, because it is what it is. It doesn't mean that you're going to change your way of living. Okay, Avalos. Okay, so remember we talked about Kimball. Hector Avalos. Hector Avalos. Avalos said, now remember, these are what the scholars came up with. These are their theories. We don't have to believe it. He argues that religions are definitely prone to violence. Avalos said that most violence is due to some resource not being in abundance. And I just want to pause right there. If you all have been with me in the Old Testament course, even if you just do your reading, Old Testament is a bunch of stories and fights. Then they move on and then they fight some more. And then they move over here and then they fight this group. Why? Because they're fighting over territory. Uh, they move into a particular place because they didn't just move just to move, but when those groups of people were moving, they were moving because there was some type of resource that they needed. There was a good place for trade, or maybe there was more water somewhere. So they move because of a resource. They needed something. And over here 50 miles, they couldn't get water. Okay, maybe it just wasn't in abundance, or the gold wasn't there, whatever. Hector Avalos also says that violence watch this, can be morally justified in order to address non-religious disputes. He said, but it is always immoral. We're going to come back and talk about that. Let's get us the last point. Avalos said, to do away with religious violence, he said you got to eliminate the religion because, oh, I got a little thing over there. He said you cannot prove religious truths. Now, let's dissect what Avalos is saying here. Let's look at the third and fourth point. Now, remember, these are his theories. You don't necessarily have to believe it. These are his theories. He says that violence can be morally justified in order to address a non-religious dispute. He said, but it's always going to be wrong. It's always going to be immoral. What do you think about that?
Yes, I don't. Yes, I'm not following. He said that violence can be morally
justified
to
address a non-religious dispute. He said, but it's always immoral. Let's say if the church went out and let's say, okay, civil rights times, and we are tired. You came in here. Let's take the bombing in 16th Street. Okay, you came in here and you hurt our little girls, and that wasn't right. And we're gonna go down there and we're gonna storm the police office, and we're gonna go down there and we're gonna storm those men houses that did this. Okay. We get it. But Avalos says, yeah, you would be justified in going down and getting those men that killed your babies. But he said it may not always, excuse me, but it is always immoral. So let's say if some of the men from that 16th Street Baptist Church went down and some of those fathers went down and killed those men that killed their babies. He says, yeah, I can see how you would be justified, morally justified. Yeah, I see that. He said, but if you took that man's life that killed your baby, Hector Avalos said it would be immoral. What you think?
And I think I said it, may have said this the other day, but my concern with his, and also with with Kimball, I think my problem with them is that they emphasize the religion as the cause, and the driving, and I'm not sure. It is as if the religion actually teaches the violence, where I tend, and I hope this doesn't mean I'm sort of selling out on it, but I tend to believe that violent nature is more within the man, with man themselves, or within humans. And religion, because the core of most religions, all of so far seems like to me that there is a respect for life and respect for peace, I should say, as a goal, even within the beliefs. And even if part of your mission is to help others to see your beliefs, I think the religions tend to try to teach there is a peaceful way to do that, but that the violence part tends to be more innate with man, or human, rather. Just seems to be. I may see that wrong, but that's the way it seems to me.
No, it's no right or wrong. Now, remember, these are just scholars and they're just sharing what they think. That's all right. We don't necessarily have to take what they think as face value.
Right.
But that's a good point. That's a very good point where actually, let me take this down as we start wrapping up today, remember, oh no, we got Gerard. Now remember in your assignment where you did the compare and contrast, and it was really interesting how many of you said, well, oh, like say for example, the principles of Ma'at, the Ten Commandments, and the commandments in the Quran. For example, they all say honor your parents or something, do good for your parents, don't forget about them, and whatever, so many words. Um, most of them said give to the poor. Most of them said, you know, like you said, live peaceably with your neighbor, or don't be starting fights, don't kill people. I think that was in all of them. Don't be going around killing people for no reason. That wasn't good. So I think there is an inherent good that wants to be done in most, if not all, religions. I think it's those, and I'm gonna call them extremists, you know, and I keep going back to like 9/11. Even the Muslim community at that time, y'all remember they went through a lot of, what's the word? Discrimination. They were beating them up. They couldn't get on a flight. Oh, it was awful for those who were like, you know, they were like, we don't ascribe to that. We don't do that. We want to be, we want to live peacefully. They were bothering their mosque and things like that. But that was just a small group of Muslims that were believing that. So, all right, let's go to our last scholar. How we doing? Let's go to our last scholar, Renee. This is the picture of him, Rene Girard. Rene Girard. Rene Girard said, he's one of the most significant writers. If you get a chance, maybe go on Amazon. He has some books there on violence and religion, and he studies the correlation between the two. But he says that most humans like to imitate what they see. They're mimetic, he says. They like to imitate what they see other people do. So if they see somebody else doing well, oh yeah, I want to do that too. And he said sometimes that desire can turn into a rivalry. Well, I want to do just as better or better than this other group. And he says this mimetic rivalry can sometimes threaten the social order, Girard said. He says at times there may be some type of sacrificial violence that has to be done. He said, therefore, violence is justified, he says, at times. Violence is justified at times. He says such conflicts are partially solved by a scapegoat mechanism. And when he talked about this, he says, but ultimately Christianity is the best antidote to violence. And Girard, well, as you can see, Girard was a Christian, but Girard was saying that, you know, he's on page 108 and 109. Okay, on page, actually 110, I'm on page 110. When we talk about Girard, what the real thing. Yeah, I wanted to get the right quote, but now I can't find it. Okay, all right. I can't find the quote. I had a quote that I wanted to bring out. But okay, Girard does say that living as a disciple of Jesus Christ, you follow his example. So when we talk about following and being an imitator, he used the Christian faith as an example of the followers want to follow Christ and live peaceably rather than in a violent way. Okay, so he said that could be kind of like an antidote, a help towards violence, because the Christian person isn't trying to live contrary to how Jesus lived while he was physically on earth. As we press pause right here, I think that now we had three scholars. We had Gerard, we had Kimball, and Avalos. And it's just interesting. It doesn't mean that we have to adopt what they have, but it's just interesting to see their scholarly work and their theories. Gerard says violence could be justified at times. Anybody want to talk about that? How do you think that it could be justified? Because remember, way back here, who was that, Kimball? Um, no, Kimball said, oh no, Avalos said, sometimes the violence is due to a resource. You're fighting over something that's not there. And I know what it was. Kimball said that sometimes the religions are partly responsible. So anybody want to jump in there before we leave out on Gerard? He says that sometimes the violence could be justified at times.
Yeah, I was reading this part down here where he was talking about the paradox of archaic religion is that in order to prevent violence, it resulted to substitute violence. And what makes sacrificial violence so effective as a response to mimetic rivalry is that it deludes the mob who attacks the victim into believing that they are innocent and the victim is guilty. And I was thinking about as Christians, part of our basis as Christians is I'll use this term, sort of acceptance of the violence that was displayed against Christ. And I'm trying. I guess I'm trying to reconcile that now in my mind because I'm thinking about it. I hadn't thought about it in this way, in this light. But part of our Christian faith, again, is that understanding, is that acceptance that that there was this violence towards Christ, and it was to our benefit.
It was to our benefit. You bring up a good point. Down at the bottom of 110.
Yeah.
Moreover, the Christian Gospels do not reveal a God who requires bloody sacrifice in order to be appeased. Instead, they reveal a God who is willing to undergo mimetic violence in order to show that God has nothing to do with our fatal rivalries and that we do not need to live enslaved to them any longer. That's from Gerard.
Right.
So that's very interesting. I like how you brought that up, where Gerard says, look, the Christian Gospels, as Mr. James said, proclaim Jesus as the victim. Jesus was innocent. And the mob and Pontius Pilate, the Pharisees, everybody was guilty that wanted to kill him, but there was no uprising. Nobody, wow, woo, that's real interesting.
Yeah.
It was meant to happen.
Yes, that was, and I guess I'm thinking now, was that, and that the intent possibly was that act of violence was to once and for all do away with the need of additional violence. Because Jesus wants us to be nonviolent, wants us to love our enemy, as a matter of fact, or But so this supreme act of violence, I'm wondering now, if that was supposedly to rid the necessity of additional violence.
True, true. That's a good point. And as we come here, you kind of bring us to our chapter 9, as we talk about social activism and the different religions. So I think your forum talks about this, and you experienced this where Dr. King, through the Christian faith, worked through social activism by being nonviolent. He wasn't trying to encourage people to get a gun and shoot the police officer. However, Malcolm X said what? We're going to do social action. We're going to clean up our communities and we're going to help our folks with, I hear you, Mr. Walter. Oh, I think he might.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I think that's where you're going too, is that Malcolm X exuded nonviolence, but he said, I'm not going to turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm. Joe didn't. And he preached that and he taught that, that we're not going to lay down anymore. And so anyway, we could get into a whole podcast here. You know, you saw the Black Panthers and things like that rise up, and they had their guns, right? They had their guns and they weren't playing. So yes. All right, everyone. I don't want to hold you too long. I'm so thankful to see you this day before Thanksgiving. If you are, just an announcement, if you are in the Old Testament course, of course, we are not meeting tomorrow. I will have a recording for you can take a look at your leisure, okay? Well, I hope you have a good Thanksgiving day tomorrow. Yes.
So our last real activity for this course will be the final paper. There is no exam. We have a
got the final paper.
And we have a discussion post that's due from chapter 8. Or I'm sorry, 9. Chapter 9 discussion post. No discussion post for chapter 14.
No.
Okay. So
you're correct. Right, you're correct. Your final paper is going to be your big doozy.
Okay. And the post. All right. Okay.
All right, everyone.
Thank you. Have a safe Thanksgiving.
Same to y'all.
All right. Take care. Be safe.
Happy Thanksgiving. All right.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving.